In part 1 of how the Titans turned their own men against them, we saw how Van received an SD card with the truth behind the 30 Bunch incident on it. And with the Titans having already dealt with the reporter who gave him the card, in today's episode of Gundam Lore, we'll see which fate will befall Van. After having watched the horrible footage together with Danica, he realized another shocking thing. Because of him, she was now implicated too. But Danica didn't see it that way. She karate chopped him on the head and then told him that she would have regretted it way more if Van had gotten himself into some serious trouble without her knowing anything or being able to do anything about it. And doing something about it was definitely what she was going to do. And the first thing she did was confiscating the SD card, to the great shock of Van. After all, he didn't want to get her into even more trouble, but Danica insisted and simply asked him to trust her. Of course, for Van it wasn't so much about trust as much as it was about him not wanting to expose his childhood friend to even more unnecessary danger. Then Van thought of another option. Why not ask Ernest? He always knew what to do. And speaking of the devil, he showed up as soon as the word left Van's mouth. Ernest saw all the papers lying on the desk and joked about them being pretty studious, but Danica quickly diverted his attention away from the papers by telling him that Van wasn't studying, he was watching lewd videos instead. And at the expense of Van's dignity, the distraction worked. So yeah, Ernest then instead told them what he came to tell them. His application to join the Titans had been approved and he was really excited about it. He would be on the front lines fighting against Zeon remnants and protecting the peace. Ernest was one of those men who earnestly wanted to join the Titans to do good, but Danica and Van knew better. Van wanted to speak up about it, but Danica quickly intervened and said that they really had to get going. In fact, she was in such a hurry that she dragged Van along, leaving behind a puzzled Ernest. The thing that we have to keep into our minds then is that at this time, the Titans were still a relatively new organization who still didn't have any of their wrongdoings publicly exposed. Or in other words, they were simply the elite force of the Federation. Meaning that Ernest had honestly expected a way more excited response to the news that he was going to be joining them. This also meant that he was pretty confused when he saw an article concerning the 30 Bunch incident on the table. As they were running away, Danica told Van that it was stupid of him to try and tell Ernest about the situation. Van might have thought that he could be trusted, but Danica told him that it was for the best that she was the only one who knew. Obviously, Van felt conflicted about this. Sure, Ernest was a Titan, but wasn't he still his friend and her big brother? But he wouldn't have time to think about that for long. At the top of the staircase were 3 members of the Titans waiting for him, and what followed was a typical Titans interrogation in which they accused him of being in contact with anti-Federation movements and also demanded him to hand over the SD card. But Van refused to talk, and the questioning wouldn't stop until he passed out. Danica meanwhile was trying everything she could to get him help. After an unspecified amount of time then, Van woke up in an unmarked Titans van, accompanied by one of his previous interrogators and the lady that had previously confronted him on the stairs. She introduced herself as Giselle Angelique Albert and apologized for the rash behavior of her subordinate earlier. She also asked for Van's understanding in this very urgent matter, a plea that might have been more effective had he not just been beaten half to death. She continued by telling Van that she could arrange for him to be immediately transferred to the military academy if he just cooperated with them and also handed over the SD card, which, she added, was most likely a fabrication made by one of the anti-Federation groups anyways. She also reassured him that the incident with the death of the reporter was nothing more than an unfortunate incident and that the Titans were simply not that kind of organization. Again, something that might have sounded more believable had he not just been beaten half to death. As a result, Van kept his mouth firmly shut, and the Titans officer had to move on to more coercive tactics. She changed the topic from anti-Federation rebels and their SD card to Ernest Maguire instead, the man that Van owed quite a lot to, which she of course reminded him of. She then talked about how he also had a sister who also happened to be enrolled here along with Van. And wouldn't it be a shame if Van's actions would somehow inconvenience them? Van immediately understood the meaning behind those words, and for the first time during the questioning, he opened his mouth. He knew nothing about their damned SD card, nor did Ernest or Danica have anything to do with it. At this point, the other member of the Titans had it. He grabbed his gun, put his finger on the trigger, and firmly pressed it against Van's temple. What if this brat was just a decoy and he'd already handed the SD card to one of his accomplices? Truly, time was of the essence and this questioning was going nowhere. Giselle did condemn the actions of her underling, but at the same time she didn't make the slightest effort to restrain him either. And when Van kept silent despite the gun to his head, Giselle spoke out again, seemingly against her underling. She could simply not allow him to hurt the good civilians of the Federation. However, this of course excluded any civilians who did something wrong. This statement essentially gave him carte blanche to do with Van as he saw fit and use whatever methods to make him speak. At first, Van thought he was just bluffing. If they blew his brains out, there was no way he could speak. But then the Titan lowered his gun to one of Van's fingers, and then told him that if he didn't speak, he would make sure Van would never pilot a mobile suit again. This made him falter for a second, but the image of Danica kept him strong. He had to believe in her. And now it was his turn to tell the Titans something. For a supposed elite unit to have to resort to such violence was simply laughably pathetic. And before they could react, something hit the van that they were in, allowing Van to escape. Danica had kept her promise and arrived with the cavalry just in time. All of this had been one avoidable disaster for the Titans had they simply been a bit more tactful. Now, they had not only lost an SD card with some pretty important information on it, but also two promising pilots, at least one of whom would have no doubt tried to become a Titans pilot too, just like the big brother that he used to look up to so much. But now, both Van and Danica would do everything in their power to fight against them instead. And that is all for this two-part story on how the Titans' cruelty would leave some of their own men with no choice but to turn against them. This part again shows us how sad it is that this manga will never get a part 2. It's got a cool story that's supplemented with some art that's right up my alley, and judging from the comments on part 1, everyone seems to agree with me on that one. Even the Japanese Amazon reviews are super positive about this manga, with the few negative ones not actually being about the quality of the manga itself, but the fact that volume 2 was never made, making them kind of feel like they were ripped off. For anyone who really wants to know what happened, there is a light novel, but as you've probably guessed, that's Japanese only. So yeah, for now, this is where the story ends. Next time I go to Japan, I will try to track down the 2 unbound chapters to see if they create a nice ending to the unfinished battle at the end of this story. I also tried looking for any other manga that this artist made or illustrated, but it seems that this manga is his only known work. At least that was bound as a tankobon volume. And that's quite a sad ending because I would have loved to buy more works created by A.E.U.G. As I've said before, I really like the art style. My only complaint then with the story of this manga is that Danica seemed to be able to enlist the help of their friendly neighborhood anti-Federation group pretty quickly. It's never stated in the manga how long Van was passed out, but unless he was in a frickin' coma, I don't think Danica had a lot of time to do so. But regardless, I'll just go with the assumption that they were also actively looking for them because, I don't know, they had some ties with that reporter, and the news of his death also got them on high alert. But aside from that, this was a very enjoyable read, and that is all for this episode of Gundam Lore. As always, a big thank you to the Patreon supporters. I hope everyone watching has a great day, and I'll see you all next time.